Was it a toxic culture and environment? Was it the firing of their OC? Was it the mysterious abdominal injury? Or was it a combination of all of the above plus a loss of confidence? Whatever you choose to believe, LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier went from one of the top quarterbacks heading into the 2025 season and a favorite for the Heisman Trophy to getting benched in Game 9 and then put on the shelf for the rest of the season. This is QB Unfiltered, my take. What really happened with this dude?
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever
Okay, everything in that intro can be debated and analyzed, but these are the facts. Entering the season, he was considered one of the top quarterbacks in the country and the favorite by a lot of gurus to win the Heisman Trophy. In fall camp, Nussmeier injured his abdominal area, and what exactly that means, nobody knows. That type of injury definitely has an effect on a quarterback's ability to cut loose with throws, rotate through throws, so it does affect QBs. Head coach Brian Kelly was fired after Game 8. Offensive coordinator and quarterback coach Joe Sloan was fired along with Kelly. Reportedly, the environment in and around LSU football had become extremely toxic. And both Nussmeier and the LSU football brass say that his season was shut down because of this abdominal injury. But in my opinion, there is more to this than just that narrative coming from LSU football. In today's video, I'm going to give you my take on what I think the other underlying problems were that derailed Garrett Nussmeier's 2025 season. Factors other than the injury that led to inconsistent play and subsequent benching. As always, like and share out this video. You know, YouTube has been doing some really frustrating stuff with the smaller channels lately. And so everything helps out, guys. And if you get something out of these QB Unfiltered videos, then please subscribe to the channel. QB Unfiltered. I really appreciate the support. Okay, some real quick history on quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. His dad is Doug Nussmeier. Doug Nussmeier was a college quarterback at the University of Idaho. He's currently the offensive coordinator for the New Orleans Saints, which means that Garrett grew up in a football/QB/coaches household. And that is a huge bonus. He redshirted at LSU in 2021. He played as a backup as a redshirt freshman in 2022. And then in 2023, he backed up Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels. Last year, 2024, was his first year to start. He played in all 13 games. They went 9-4, and Nuss threw for 4,043 yards. That's a 64.2% completion percentage. He threw 29 touchdowns and 12 picks. He was also playing under first-year offensive coordinator Joe Sloan, who was elevated from his QB coach position. So now we move to 2025, and obviously he comes into the season as one of the dudes at the QB position in college football. He ended up playing in 9 games. LSU went 5-4 in those games. He threw for 1,927 yards with a 67.4 completion percentage. He threw 12 touchdowns and 5 picks. And he was playing for Sloan as the offensive coordinator. He was playing with a ab strain or a core injury. We'll talk about that a lot in today's video. And he was playing with what a lot of people said was a very toxic locker room. Head coach Brian Kelly and Joe Sloan were fired after the 8th game of the season, a loss to Texas A&M. LSU named Frank Wilson as the interim head coach, and Wilson then implemented an offense by committee. Now, it's never a great situation for an offense, and especially a quarterback, when not only the head coach is let go in the middle of the season, but the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach is let go. And so Wilson puts together an offensive coordinator by committee, which is the kiss of death. That's like playing two quarterbacks in a game. It's counterproductive and it never works out. Wilson called it a collaborative approach to offense. Wow. So they had a pass game coordinator and a run game coordinator. You can't do it. You need to have one voice, one vision, and one offensive coordinator, period. Okay, and as we said earlier, Nuss was pulled in the Alabama game in the third quarter of that game, and then he was put on the shelf for the rest of the season by the coaching staff and or the training staff and or Nussmeier himself. We don't know exactly what went down. And this is where we dig into a situation where I think it is a lot more gray area for Nussmeier than just the abdominal injury. It's my opinion that there were other factors that led to not only Nussmeier struggling this year, but the entire LSU football team. Let's start with this. There have been tons of reports coming out of Baton Rouge that the culture surrounding LSU football in 2025 had become toxic. And Brian Kelly, in my opinion, most definitely had a hand in this. I'm not a big Brian Kelly fan. I never have been. I think that he's not authentic. I didn't like the way he handled things at Notre Dame, how he left Notre Dame, obviously some of the things that he did at LSU. But he has to shoulder a lot of the blame that went into this 2025 season and the culture and environment that he allowed to happen. So Kelly was part of the problem, but I think the biggest issue with LSU were the dudes in their locker room. You've heard me say a lot of times on this channel, if on the field you have poor play, inconsistent play, sloppy play, poor effort, selfish 15-yard personal foul penalties, yelling at coaches, yelling at each other, laying down in games, you can almost guarantee that you've got a toxic locker room full of what I like to call locker room lawyers. Because that bullshit that goes on in locker rooms always manifests itself on the game field. And watching LSU play this year, that definitely was going on, in my opinion. Here's the other thing that toxic dudes do to a football program. They suck the joy out of playing for everybody. And they make the environment so negative and so draining that it affects good players. And these guys have an effect on quarterbacks and quarterback play, especially if the toxic guys are coming from the receiver position. Now, obviously, I wasn't in their receiver room. I wasn't in LSU's locker room. I wasn't in their quarterback room, but I did watch them quite a bit on TV. I watched them this year and I watched them last year. And in the games that I was watching this year, particularly the Alabama game, I wrote down in my notes early in that game, LSU's receivers are suspect. Earlier in the season, there was a highly documented incident. It was a game against Florida where the cameras caught Kelly and one of his receivers nose to nose, and Kelly was yelling and screaming at this guy, talking about poor effort, doing it his way, so on and so forth. And then apparently, allegedly, called the guy uncoachable. Now, it's been my experience that when that phrase comes out of a coach's mouth, it's usually warranted. In that same Florida game, another receiver was caught screaming and yelling in Kelly's face. That's a problem, folks. Again, it's my belief that Brian Kelly rubs people the wrong way. He just has that personality. He also coaches hard, right? But the fact that you've got players that are screaming in coaches' faces, that is just really unacceptable. It kind of reminds me of Travis Kelce standing next to Andy Reid, screaming and yelling in his ear on the sideline. And also that receiver that got up into the face of the Philadelphia Eagles coach. Those two teams imploded, and those situations sort of go hand in hand with that. Hopefully this makes sense to everybody. And as far as quarterbacks go with toxic players, there's a long list of NFL and college quarterbacks in the history of the game who were really good QBs that just didn't play good because they were in a shitty environment. Okay, so in my opinion, if you take the ab strain out of it, you take the firing of the OC out, and you take the offense by committee out of the mix, I think that the toxic environment and the locker room may have had the biggest effect on quarterback Garrett Nussmeier this year. And then there's this. Anytime you've got 5 different narratives, 5 different statements on an injury coming from 5 different camps, that's an issue. And with Nussmeier's injury, there were these 5 narratives coming from the following: the head coach, the training staff, Nussmeier himself, Nussmeier's dad, and the interim head coach. Let's start with Brian Kelly. He was downplaying the injury all the way up until the time he got fired, saying it was minor and that Nussmeier had tweaked his abdominal. Okay. Now, this is an issue because if this is causing problems with Nuss throwing the football and the head coach is out there saying, yeah, it's not that big a thing, and he doesn't look good throwing the ball in games, how does that look on Garrett Nussmeier? You see the problem with that? Then you've got the training staff who's calling it a core injury and treating it as such. And maybe it was a core injury. Nobody knows because nobody can give us a straight answer of what it was. And what's confusing about this is you've got Nussmeier and his dad and the training staff and head coach Brian Kelly that are saying in one breath it's a core injury, in another breath it's an abdominal strain, in another breath we don't know. Then there's Garrett Nussmeier, who has implied and then said that the training staff at LSU misdiagnosed the injury. Sort of. He sat down with reporters. He said that he went and saw another training staff, another set of doctors. They correctly diagnosed the injury. They correctly treated it. And then he was asked, well, what was the correct diagnosis? To which Nussmeier replied, I'm not going to get into specifics. And he sat down with a bunch of different people, reporters, NFL people, scouts, front office, all that at the Senior Bowl recently, and just muddied the waters even more by talking in riddles and contradictions. Then there's his dad, Doug Nussmeier, at the Senior Bowl, asked if the injury was torso related. He said, yes. Okay, that tells us a lot. And then he had a no comment basically when it was implied that LSU's training staff maybe misdiagnosed it. And finally, you throw in interim coach Wilson, whose explanation of yanking Nussmeier out in the Alabama game wasn't due to an ab strain or a injury to his core. It was because he was playing poorly and they needed a spark for the offense. Does this sound like a complete and absolute shit show? Okay, staying with that Bama game. I've said this a lot on my channel. I spend a ton of time in these games watching and studying the body language and facial expressions of the quarterbacks. By doing that, I think I got a pretty good handle on what's going on in their heads during the course of a game. And there was this one drive in the first half where they had to punt the ball and Nussmeier came off the field. He jogged off the field and he's running right towards the camera, right? They're shooting it from the press box there. He's running right at it. It's a straight on shot of him and he's in close up on his face. And I'm going, holy shit. This guy has totally lost his confidence. As he's jogging to the sideline, he's doing the darting eyes like this, like he is waiting to see what kind of reaction he's going to get from either his teammates or the coaches. That is not good for your starting quarterback. And the play that ended his night happened in the third quarter. They were in the red zone. He dropped back to throw and they showed this thing from the end zone camera and he was getting some pressure coming from his left, the defensive end working against his left tackle. He had all kinds of grass to his right to just slide in that direction to get away from this pressure, keep his eyes downfield and deliver a throw. He had room to climb the pocket, keep his eyes downfield and deliver the throw. What he chose to do, which was shocking, was his left tackle was getting beat upfield and to the outside. Nuss reverse pivoted and tried to roll left. Now, you can do that if that defensive end is crossing the face of your left tackle and working inside. Then you can reverse pivot and roll outside of that shit and look downfield to throw the football. But by him doing what he did with his tackle getting beat the way he was getting beat, he reverse pivoted right into an easy sack by that defensive end, and that was enough to end his night. And then what happened next on the sideline was also very telling. So the cameras are on him and Wilson, the interim head coach. This is a one-way conversation, and Garrett Nussmeier wanted nothing to do with it. So Wilson's talking to him, looking him straight in the eyes, and Nussmeier is doing this. Okay, body language, looking up at whatever, as if to say, yeah, coach, I'm not real interested in listening to what you have to say, nor do I agree with what you have to say. Not a good look. And then Wilson said something that caused Garrett Nussmeier to do this. Snap his head and eyes to Wilson's face like he said something that he really didn't want to hear. I don't know if it was you're done for the night or we're going a different direction for the rest of the season, or I don't know what it was. But I think that right then and there on the sideline, his fate for the rest of the season was determined. My opinion. Okay. And then, that following week in practice, he re-injures. Again, confusing. They're talking about him dealing with this ab injury, this abdominal strain the whole season long, but then they say preparing for the Arkansas game, he re-injured the area on a short little shallow cross throw in practice. Again, it's a confusing type deal, and that's when he made the decision. The training staff made the decision. The coaches, who I think had already made the decision, said we're going to shut it down for the rest of the year. Okay, so let's flash forward now to the Senior Bowl. New environment, new coaches, new players, new receivers. Nussmeier looking healthy, throwing like he's healthy, but you still can't get a straight answer out of him or his dad about the injury, which leads me to think the following. It's either a case of covering someone's ass, it is a narrative to cover someone's ass, or it's being used as a crutch. I don't know. Now, this stuff about being secretive, they're not going to say anything about an ab injury because they don't want these NFL front offices to know about history of injuries and all that kind of crap. That's a bunch of bullshit, okay? These front office people, they know everything that has gone on with the guy's injury history. Obviously, unless you're the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix, right? They go all the way back into high school and frickin' junior high to find out what your injury history is. So, that doesn't fly with me either. So it's just a really strange deal. But at the end of the day, I know this, that I'm sure that he did have some sort of a abdominal injury, a strain, something with the core, and it makes it really painful to throw the ball, right? Can it be done? Yes. Does it hurt like hell? Yes. Does it change your mechanics? It could. And Nussmeier's claim that it did change all of his mechanics, right? Do you have to rebuild all of your mechanics as Nuss said he had to do? I think that's being a little bit dramatic. Okay, and then finally I'll say this. Football teams operate in a tricky and somewhat fragile ecosystem. Confidence and culture are instrumental to a team's success. Same with a quarterback. You put a good quarterback in a toxic environment, he's going to struggle. You put a good quarterback, an average quarterback in a QB-friendly offense with a good quarterback coach who teaches, motivates, pushes, and elevates the guy's game, he's going to shine. And it's a fine line with the entire team that coaches walk in keeping that confidence and that team swagger and the groove going in the right direction. And it's easy to take teams and quarterbacks out of that groove. One of the surefire, fastest ways to do it is to allow locker room lawyers to hold court behind closed doors. And I think in me reading the tea leaves on what went down with LSU in 2025, that definitely was going on. So as far as Garrett Nussmeier and being one of the top QBs going into 2025 and a Heisman favorite, was it Joe Sloan as the OC? Was it the offensive line and their pass protection problems? Was it the fact that they didn't have a run game? Was it the suspect play of the receivers? Was it the changing coaches? Was it offense by committee approach? Was it the toxic locker room? Was it the mysterious abdominal injury? Or was it a combination of all of that that eroded the confidence, ultimately, of Garrett Nussmeier? You know, here's wishing for better days for this kid. As the Senior Bowl week and the game proved, he can play. And it's amazing, you know, a change of scenery goes a long way in the physical and mental health of any quarterback. Okay, guys, so let me know what you think. Did I get it right or did I get it wrong? This is QB Unfiltered. And remember, always throw the ball short to guys who can score. See ya.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.